I never thought I'd find myself in a showdown with my neighborhood's HOA. But sometimes the people who are supposed to protect the community turn into the very ones making life unbearable. Let me take you back to the day it all began. It was an ordinary morning. The sun was out, I had my coffee in hand, and I was ready to head out for a simple grocery run. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, till I stepped outside and saw something that immediately stopped me in my tracks. My gate, the entrance to my own property, was completely blocked. At first, I thought maybe it was a delivery truck, or perhaps a contractor working on someone else's yard who had mistakenly pulled too far forward. But no, this wasn't some innocent mistake. Parked diagonally across my gate, so tightly that even walking through was nearly impossible, was the car of one of the HOA officers. You know the type, those self-appointed enforcers who walk around the neighborhood acting like they own every square inch of it. And this particular officer, well, let's just say she had a reputation. People whispered about her at barbecues, warned newcomers to be careful because she liked to flex her power in ways that had nothing to do with community rules. I stood there for a good minute, trying to figure out what to do. My first thought was maybe she was just running into a neighbor's house for a quick visit. Maybe she'd be right back. But after 5, 10, 15 minutes went by, and her car was still blocking my gate. I realized this wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. And the anger started bubbling up inside me. I walked around the car, checking to see if there was any note on the windshield. Nothing. I knocked on the nearest door, but nobody answered. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the HOA's little monthly bulletin, the one they send with warnings about trash, cans being left out too long, and grass being an inch too high. Sure enough, she picked up. "Why is your car blocking my gate?" Annie asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Her reply was smug, almost rehearsed. "Your gate doesn't comply with the neighborhood's appearance guidelines. Till the matter is reviewed, I've decided to temporarily restrict its use." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Restrict its use. She wasn't some city official. She wasn't law enforcement, and she sure didn't have the authority to block me from entering or leaving my own property. Yet there she was, acting like she had every right. Now, here's the part she didn't know. My brother isn't just in law enforcement. He's the chief of police. And if there's one thing I know from years of hearing his stories, it's that no one has the right to restrict your access to your own home. Not even a so-called HOA officer with a clipboard and a superiority complex. But I didn't tell her that right away. Instead, I asked again, "Are you seriously telling me you can block my property because you don't like the way my gate looks?" Her tone grew sharper. "Those are the rules. And until you fix it, you're not allowed to use it." I could feel the heat rising in my face. The rules she was referring to had never once been mentioned in any official HOA meeting, nor were they in the bylaws I'd reviewed when I moved in. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. She wanted to remind me and everyone else that she had power. But here's where things started getting interesting. As I stood there, staring at her car blocking my gate, I noticed a few of my neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, watching the whole scene unfold. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. This woman had probably pulled stunts like this before. Intimidating people who didn't know their rights. People who just wanted to keep the peace and avoid drama. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and snapped a few pictures of her car blocking my gate. "I'm giving you 5 minutes to move your vehicle," I told her firmly. "If you don't, I'm calling the police." That's when her attitude shifted. Suddenly, she sounded nervous. "There's no need to get law enforcement involved," she said quickly. "We can resolve this as neighbors." I almost laughed at the sudden change in tone. A minute ago, she was acting like a dictator, and now she wanted to play nice. But the thing is, I wasn't bluffing. If she didn't move, I was absolutely calling. And here's the twist she never saw coming when I say calling the police. I don't mean just dialing the non-emergency line and waiting around. I mean my brother, the actual chief of police, who doesn't tolerate abuse of authority, fake rules, or harassment. But I held back from playing that card right away. Why? Because sometimes the best way to teach someone a lesson is to let them walk straight into the consequences of their own arrogance. And trust me, this HOA officer was about to learn that the hard way. As I waited, I could feel the tension building, not just in me, but in the air around the neighborhood. Everyone was watching. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. And I knew that no matter how this ended, it was going to be a story people remembered for a long time. When I thought the worst was over, things got even stranger. That night, I sat in my living room replaying the entire scene in my head. The HOA officer had no right to block my gate. It was my private property, and yet he stood there like he was guarding a secret treasure. The arrogance in his tone replayed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about some minor rule enforcement. It felt personal, almost like they were daring me to push back. The next morning, I woke up to an even bigger shock. I found a bright orange notice taped directly onto my front door. In bold letters, it claimed I was in violation of several community guidelines. According to the paper, I had allegedly failed to maintain my fence, my yard, and even my mailbox. I couldn't believe my eyes. My property was in perfect shape, and anyone walking by could see that. This wasn't about violations. It was retaliation for not bowing down to their so-called authority the night before. I tore the notice off my door, but I didn't rip it up. I wanted to keep it as evidence. If this was how they wanted to play, I'd be ready, and that's when my brother called. His timing was uncanny, as if he sensed something was brewing. I told him everything. The blocked gate, the threats, and now this ridiculous notice. He didn't even hesitate. Do not confront them alone again, he said firmly. This isn't just HOA bullying anymore. They're crossing into harassment. His words echoed in my mind, making the situation feel even more serious. That evening, I noticed something else unusual. A few cars slowed down near my driveway, their occupants pretending to check their phones or look at something else. But I knew better they were watching. Whether they were HOA members or just curious neighbors who had heard rumors, I couldn't tell. But it was obvious someone was spreading stories. The tension was thick in the air, and I could feel the pressure mounting. I knew I had to stay calm, but inside, I was burning with anger. The HOA officer thought he had power over me because he had the board behind him. But what he didn't know was that my brother wasn't just a copy, was the chief of police. If things escalated, the HOA's little games wouldn't just backfire. They would explode in their faces. The real breaking point came 2 days later. I came home from work and found that my gate had been blocked again. This time, not by the officer himself, but with a heavy chain and padlock. It was clear now, this was no accident, no misunderstanding. They were deliberately trying to trap me, to make me bend. But the moment I saw that lock, something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If they wanted to play dirty, I would document every single step. As I was filming, I heard footsteps behind me. And there he was, the same HOA officer, arms crossed, smirk plastered on his face. We told you this gate doesn't meet compliance standards, he said smugly. Until it does, it stays shut. His arrogance made my blood boil. I pointed at the lock and asked calmly, "Do you realize you're trespassing on private property and unlawfully blocking access?" He didn't even blink. He thought he was untouchable. That was when I dropped the line that made his face change. "You know my brother is the chief of police, right?" For the first time, his smirk wavered. I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. He quickly tried to regain control, saying the HOA had legal authority, that they could enforce compliance. By any means, but I could see he was no longer as confident as before. He was starting to realize he'd poked the wrong bear. I didn't waste another second. I called my brother on speaker right there in front of him, making sure the officer heard every word. My brother's voice came through, calm but firm, asking me to describe the situation. As I explained, I could see the color draining from the officer's face. He suddenly looked like a kid caught stealing cookies from a jar. It was the first crack in his wall of arrogance, and I knew this was just the beginning of his downfall. What I didn't know at the time was that this confrontation would set off a chain of events that no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. Because once the chief of police gets involved, an HOA officer's fake authority doesn't just crumble, it vanishes completely. And soon, everyone would see just how far they had gone to abuse their power. The moment I hung up the phone, I knew things were about to change. My brother didn't waste time. Within the hour, a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. The HOA officer, who had been standing there puffed up with pride minutes earlier, suddenly looked uneasy. The neighbors peeked from their windows, whispers spreading like wildfire. Everyone had been waiting to see how far this standoff would go. And now, the real showdown was here. The officer tried to speak first, waving some papers around as if they gave him authority. "This is a community enforcement action," he declared, his voice trembling just slightly. But the patrol officer who stepped out of the car wasn't buying it. He looked at the padlock on my gate, then at me, then back at the HOA officer. "Sir," he said sharply, "you can't block someone's private property like this. This isn't an enforcement action. This is trespassing." That word hit the officer hard. Trespassing. His face paled. He tried to argue, insisting that the HOA's bylaws gave him the right, but the patrol officer didn't budge. "Bylaws aren't above the law," he replied firmly. "You're interfering with access to private property? That's a criminal matter." The neighbors gasped audibly. You could feel the shift in the air. For so long, the HOA had used fear and intimidation to control people. Now, for the first time, one of their own was being called out publicly. As the patrol officer continued, my brother arrived. His presence alone was enough to silence everyone. The HOA officer stiffened, his hands twitching nervously. My brother didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His authority was clear in the way he carried himself. He looked directly at the HOA officer and said, "You're done. Remove the lock." Now, the silence was deafening. For a moment, the officer hesitated, as though his pride might stop him from backing down. But under the weight of my brother's stare, he broke. With shaky hands, he pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the chain. The gate swung open, and for the first time in days, I felt the tension in my chest ease. It wasn't just about the gate, it was about standing up to bullying, about reminding them that power only goes so far before it hits a wall. But my brother wasn't finished. He made it clear to the patrol officer that a full report would be filed. The HOA officer's behavior wasn't just overstepping, it was harassment. Depending on how far the investigation went, there could be charges. The color drained from the officer's face completely. For the first time, he understood the consequences of his actions. The neighbors began to gather, no longer hiding behind curtains. Whispers turned into conversations, and soon, people were openly talking about their own experiences with the HOA. Stories poured out: fines for flowers that didn't match, threats for leaving trash cans out too long, warnings for minor paint issues. It was as though one person standing up had given the entire community permission to speak. The HOA officer tried to slip away quietly, but the damage was done. His reputation once built on intimidation, was now crumbling before his eyes. And, with my brother there, the fear that had kept everyone silent began to disappear. People looked at me differently, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who had stood up when no one else dared. Later that night, my brother sat with me at the kitchen table. "This isn't just about you," he said. "What they did crossed the line, and they've probably been doing it to others too. If the community stands together, they can't keep abusing their authority." His words struck me deeply. This wasn't just a personal victory, was the start of something bigger. Sure enough, then the next few weeks, changes began to ripple through the neighborhood. Residents started attending HOA meetings in larger numbers, demanding accountability, questioning every rule, every fee, every so-called violation. The board, once untouchable, now faced real resistance, and the officer who had blocked my gate, he resigned quietly, unable to face the mounting pressure. Looking back, I realized that everything started with one moment, standing my ground and refusing to let someone block me from my own property. It wasn't easy. It was stressful, infuriating, and at times even a little scary. But it proved something important. Bullies only have power when people stay silent. Once you push back, their grip slips, as I watched my neighborhood slowly transform into a place where people weren't afraid to speak. I felt a sense of pride. My brother had been the one to back me up when things got tough, but it was the community that carried the torch forward. Together, we had reminded the HOA that they were supposed to serve, not control. And now, every time I walk through my gate, I smile. Not just because it's open, but because it represents something bigger. It represents freedom, resilience, and the courage to stand up when it matters most. And to this day, I'll never forget the look on that officer's face when he realized his little power trip was over for good.